5 hours. That is exactly how long it took for Meridian Atlantic Airlines, a company valued at $7 billion, to effectively cease to exist. It didn't happen because of a plane crash, a terror threat, or a fuel shortage. It happened because one gate agent decided that a man in a hoodie didn't look like he belonged in seat 1A. She didn't know that the man she was sneering at wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who owned the debt on every single engine in her fleet. This is the story of Darius Kincaid, the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The fluorescent lights of JFK International Airport hummed with that specific, headache-inducing frequency that only frequent flyers seem to notice. For Darius Kincaid, it was the soundtrack of his life. He had spent more time in lounges and cabins over the last decade than he had in his own living room in Chicago. Tonight, however, Darius wasn't looking like the founder and CEO of Kincaid Global Logistics, the shadow firm that quietly moved about 40% of the world's microprocessor chips. Tonight, he looked like a tired man who had just come off a 12-hour negotiation in a drafty warehouse in Queens. He was wearing a charcoal cashmere hoodie, unbranded but worth more than most people's suits, over a pair of dark joggers and pristine sneakers. He looked comfortable. To the untrained eye, he looked like nobody. He approached the gate for Meridian Atlantic Flight 882 to London Heathrow. He just wanted to sleep. He had seat 1A, a first-class suite with a lay-flat bed, privacy doors, and the promise of a whiskey neat before takeoff. The gate agent, a woman whose name tag read Brenda, was typing furiously on her terminal. She didn't look up as Darius approached the first-class priority lane. She was snapping gum, her posture rigid with the petty authority of someone who controls the door to a metal tube. "Excuse me," Darius said, his voice deep and gravelly from exhaustion. "Boarding hasn't started, but I wanted to check my bag at the gate. It's a bit fragile." Brenda stopped typing. She slowly lifted her eyes, scanning Darius from his sneakers to his hoodie. Her lip curled slightly. It was a micro-expression Darius had seen 1,000 times. It was the look that said, "You are in the wrong line." "This is the priority lane, sir," Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that barely masked the disdain. "Economy boarding is in Zone 4 and 5. You need to wait until those zones are called." Darius didn't blink. He was used to this. "I know. I'm in first. Seat 1A. He placed his boarding pass and his passport on the high counter. Brenda let out a short, incredulous huff. She didn't even pick up the passport. She just tapped a long, manicured fingernail on the counter. "Sir, I need you to step aside. We have VIPs boarding shortly, and I can't have the lane clogged up." "I am the VIP," Darius said, his voice remaining level. "Scan the pass, Brenda." The use of her name made her bristle. She snatched the boarding pass, her eyes narrowing, as if she expected it to be a forgery written in crayon. She scanned it. The machine beeped a happy, green confirmation tone. Darius Kincaid. Seat 1A. Status: Global Infinite. For a second, Brenda looked confused. The computer was telling her one thing, but her bias was telling her another. She frowned, typing a few commands. "There's an error," she muttered. "There is no error," Darius said. "I bought that ticket 3 weeks ago. Full fare." "No," Brenda said, shaking her head. "The system is flagging this seat. It's a duplicate booking. We have a double-booked situation." "That sounds like an operational problem, not a passenger problem," Darius said, leaning in slightly. "But since I'm standing here with a valid boarding pass, and I'm the first one here, I assume the seat is mine." Brenda ignored him. She looked past Darius's shoulder to a man standing a few feet behind him. The man was loud, wearing a blue suit that was too tight in the shoulders, talking loudly on a cell phone about quarterly projections. He looked the part of the corporate traveller Brenda was used to serving. "Mr. Brock?" Brenda called out, beaming a smile that was completely different from the scowl she had given Darius. The man in the blue suit, Timothy Brock, hung up his phone and stepped forward, brushing past Darius. "Yeah? Is there an issue? I need to get on. I've got a meeting in the city at 9 a.m. "Mr. Brock, it seems we have a slight conflict with seat 1A, Brenda said, her eyes flicking back to Darius with disdain. "But I think we can resolve it. You're a platinum flyer, correct?" "You know it," Brock said, smirking at Darius. "Does this guy have my drink order or something?" Darius felt the heat rise in his neck. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, calculating resolve. "I'm not the help, Timothy. I'm the man holding the ticket for the seat you're trying to shark." Brenda slammed her hand on the counter. "Sir, step back immediately, or I will call security. Mr. Brock, please give me a moment. I'm going to have to manually override this." "Override what?" Darius asked. "You are manually overriding a valid ticket because you don't think I look like I can afford it. Be very careful, Brenda. You are about to make a career-defining decision." "Are you threatening me?" Brenda's voice went up an octave, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Sir, you are being aggressive. I am denying you boarding to first class due to behavioral issues and system errors." She typed 3 keystrokes. Click, click, click. The printer whirred. She ripped off a flimsy slip of paper. "Seat 34E, she said, thrusting it at him. "Middle seat, back row. Take it or you don't fly. And if you say one more word, I'm marking you as a security threat, and you won't fly on Meridian ever again." Darius looked at the ticket. Then he looked at Timothy Brock, who was chuckling. "Tough break, buddy," Brock said, flashing a blindingly white smile. "Maybe try Greyhound next time." Darius looked at Brenda one last time. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He pulled out his phone, a simple black device, and took a photo of Brenda, then a photo of Brock. 34E, Darius said softly. "Understood." He took the ticket. He walked past the first-class lane, past the business-class lane, and stood in the line for Zone 5. The walk down the jet bridge was a study in humiliation, but Darius treated it like a crime scene investigation. He noted everything. He noted the way the flight attendant at the door, a man named Greg, glanced at his ticket and pointed to the right aisle without making eye contact. "Back of the bus, pal," Greg muttered to a colleague as Darius passed. Darius heard it. He filed it away. He walked through the first-class cabin. He saw Timothy Brock settling into seat 1A, his seat. Brock was already sipping a glass of champagne, his jacket off, laughing with a flight attendant about how the riffraff is getting bold these days. Darius paused for a fraction of a second. He could have stopped. He could have called his lawyer right there. He could have demanded the captain comes out. But Darius knew something about war that Brenda and Brock didn't. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. He continued walking, past the lie-flat seats of business class, past the extra legroom economy plus. He walked until the carpet changed from blue to grey, until the air felt stale, until he reached the very last row of the Boeing 777. Seat 34E was exactly what he expected. It was sandwiched between a young mother with a crying infant in 34D and a man in 34F, who was already asleep and encroaching on the armrest. The seat didn't recline. It was right next to the lavatory. The smell of chemical disinfectant and recycled coffee was potent. Darius sat down. He was 6'2", his knees pressed firmly into the metal back of the seat in front of him. He took out his phone. He had signal for another 10 minutes before the doors closed. He opened an app that very few people in the world had access to. It was the internal dashboard for Kincaid Global. He navigated to the Assets and Liabilities tab. He typed in Meridian Atlantic. The screen populated with data. It was a waterfall of numbers. Darius didn't just run a logistics company. Over the last 5 years, his private equity arm had been quietly buying up distressed debt in the aviation sector. He knew Meridian Atlantic was struggling. They had over-leveraged themselves to buy these new planes. They were operating on razor-thin margins. But there was something specific he was looking for. Ah, there it was. Contract identifier, MA Fuel X77. Meridian Atlantic didn't buy their fuel outright. They didn't have the cash flow. They used a credit facility provided by a shell company called Omni Energy. Omni Energy fronted the cost of the Jet A1 fuel at airports around the world, and Meridian paid them back 60 days later with interest. It was a lifeline. Without it, Meridian's planes couldn't refuel, and Kincaid Global owned 100% of Omni Energy. Darius looked at the screen. He saw the credit status toggle. It was currently set to active. He didn't flip the switch yet. He needed the plane to be in the air. He needed them to be fully committed to the mistake. "Sir, you need to put your phone away," a flight attendant snapped. It was Greg again, doing his final checks. He loomed over Darius. "And put your bag under the seat. If it doesn't fit, we're checking it." "It fits," Darius said, shoving his bespoke leather weekender under the seat, scuffing the Italian leather. "Attitude," Greg whispered, shaking his head as he walked away. "Unbelievable." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bennett from the flight deck. We're looking at an on-time departure to London Heathrow. Flight time is 6 hours and 40 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." Darius closed his eyes. He wasn't going to relax. He was going to wait. He waited for the pushback. He waited for the safety demonstration. He waited for the roar of the engines that were currently burning fuel paid for by his credit line. The plane taxied. The wheels lifted off the wet tarmac of JFK. They climbed into the dark sky over the Atlantic. Once they reached 10,000 feet, the Wi-Fi indicator turned on. Darius pulled out his credit card, the black Amex that Brenda had refused to look at, and paid $29.99 for the full flight internet package. He opened his secure messaging app. He composed a message to 2 people, Preston Halloway, the CEO of Meridian Atlantic, and his own chief legal officer, Sarah Jenkins. He didn't send it yet. First, he needed a drink. He pressed the call button. 10 minutes passed. No one came. He pressed it again. Finally, Greg appeared, looking annoyed. "What do you need? We haven't started service yet." "I'd like a water," Darius said. "We'll be coming through with the cart in 20 minutes, Greg said, turning away. "Wait your turn." Darius watched Greg walk all the way up to the front, where he opened the curtain to first class. Through the gap, Darius saw Greg pouring champagne for Timothy Brock. He saw Brock laughing, pointing back toward the economy cabin, making some joke. Greg laughed with him. That was it. The final straw. The karma counter had just hit maximum capacity. Darius unlocked his phone. He opened the email draft. To Preston, HallowayMeridianAtlantic.com. CC, legalorkincaidglobal.com. Subject, immediate notice of default. Contract MA Fuel XSA7. Preston, I am currently sitting in seat 34E on your flight 882 to London. I was holding a valid ticket for 1A. Your gate agent, Brenda Miller, denied me boarding based on my appearance and gave my seat to a Mr. Timothy Brock. Your flight crew has subsequently threatened me and refused service. As you know, Kincaid Global holds the credit facility for your fuel operations via Omni Energy. Clause 44, subsection B of our agreement states that any action by the borrower deemed to cause reputational harm to the lender or its principals constitutes an immediate event of default. I am the principal. You have exactly 10 minutes to explain to me why I shouldn't execute the default clause. If you do not reply, I am freezing your global fuel credit lines. No Meridian plane will be able to refuel at any airport, anywhere in the world, effective immediately. You have my number. Darius. He hit send. 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled office in Atlanta, it was 2:00 p.m. Preston Holloway was in the middle of a lunch meeting with potential investors when his phone buzzed on the mahogany table. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then his Apple Watch vibrated. Then his iPad lit up. "Sorry, one moment," Preston said to the investors. He glanced at his phone. He saw the urgent tag from his executive assistant. Read email from Darius Kincaid now. Preston frowned. He knew the name Kincaid, of course. Everyone in the industry did. Darius Kincaid was the fixer. If you needed to move an oil rig across the Pacific, you called Kincaid. If you needed to bail out a failing airline, you borrowed money from Kincaid's subsidiaries. Preston opened the email, his face drained of color. The piece of steak he had been chewing suddenly felt like a rock in his throat. "Is everything all right, Preston?" one of the investors asked. Preston stood up, knocking his chair back. I have to take this. It's an operational emergency." He ran out of the room, dialing his VP of operations as he went. "Shut up and listen," he barked into the phone. "Who is on flight 882 to London? Check the manifest, now." "Oh, looking now, sir," the nervous voice on the other end said. "First class is full. We have a Timothy Brock in 1A. "Who is in 34E? Preston screamed. "Check 34E. There was a pause, the sound of typing. 34E. "We have a Darius Kincaid. Looks like he was bumped from first, due to a duplicate booking override at the gate." "Oh my God," Preston whispered. He felt like he was going to vomit. "Do you know who that is? That's the guy who pays for our gas." "Sir, get the captain of flight 882 on the SATCOM immediately. Patch him through to my cell, and get the station manager at JFK on the line. I want that gate agent fired before she even clocks out. Go!" Back on the plane, Darius was watching a movie on the tiny screen in front of him, or pretending to. He was actually watching the time. 7 minutes had passed. Suddenly the cabin lights, which had been dimmed for the night flight, flickered on to full brightness. The seatbelt sign bonged aggressively. The intercom crackled. This time, Captain Bennett's voice wasn't smooth and relaxed. It was tight, strained. Cabin crew, please suspend service immediately and, report to the galley for an interphone conference. Immediately." Darius smiled. He paused his movie. He looked up to see Greg, the rude flight attendant, rushing down the aisle from the back galley to the front, looking confused. A moment later, the phone at Darius's seat, the one embedded in the armrest that nobody used anymore, rang. The woman in 34D looked at him, startled. "I didn't know those things actually worked." "They do when the CEO calls," Darius said calmly. He picked up the handset. "This is Darius." "Mr. Kincaid." It was Preston Holloway. His voice was trembling. "Mr. Kincaid, I am so sorry. I just received your email. I am looking at the report now. This is a catastrophic failure of protocol. I am personally apologizing." "Apologies are free, Preston," Darius said, his voice loud enough for the passengers around him to hear. "My first-class ticket was $6,000. My dignity is priceless, and your fuel bill for this month is $40 million. "Please," Preston begged, "don't cut the credit line. We have 60 planes in the air right now. If we can't refuel when they land, we're grounded. The network will collapse." "You should have thought about that before your staff decided a black man in a hoodie couldn't possibly be a first-class passenger," Darius said coldly. "You have a culture problem, Preston, and I'm about to make it a solvency problem." "What can I do?" Preston asked. "Name it. Anything." "I want 3 things," Darius said. 1. I want that gate agent, Brenda, terminated immediately. 2. I want a written public apology issued by your office within the hour. And 3. Darius looked down the long aisle toward the curtain of first class. 3. I want the captain to come back here, personally escort me to seat 1A, and I want the passenger currently sitting there removed from the seat. I don't care if he has to sit in the lavatory." "Done," Preston said instantly. "Consider it done. I'm radioing Bennett now." Darius hung up the phone. He crossed his arms. The woman in 34D was staring at him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I'm the guy who fixes things," Darius said. 2 minutes later, the curtain at the front of the plane whipped open. Captain Bennett, wearing his full uniform and hat, walked out. He wasn't walking with the swagger of a pilot anymore. He was walking with the urgency of a man trying to save his pension. He marched down the aisle, past business, past economy plus, all the way to the back. Every passenger turned to watch. The captain stopped at row 34. "Mr. Kincaid," the captain said, his face pale. "Captain," Darius nodded. "Sir, on behalf of Meridian Atlantic, I would like to formally apologize for the error at the gate," the captain said, his voice cracking slightly. We have prepared your seat in first class. If you would please follow me." "And Mr. Brock?" Darius asked, not moving yet. "Mr. Brock is being relocated," the captain said. Darius unbuckled his seatbelt. He grabbed his bag from under the seat. He stood up, towering over the captain. "Lead the way." As Darius began the long walk back to the front of the plane, the entire economy cabin went silent. He walked past Greg, who was pressing himself against the galley wall, looking at the floor, terrified. When they reached first class, the scene was chaotic. Timothy Brock was standing in the aisle, red-faced, shouting, "This is insane! You can't move me! I'm a platinum member! I'm suing this airline!" "Sir, you need to move to seat 34E immediately, or we will have law enforcement meet the plane in London," the captain said sharply. "This is a direct order from the CEO." Brock looked at the captain. Then he looked at Darius. The realization hit him. The man in the hoodie. "You," Brock stammered. "You did this?" "You're in my seat, Timothy," Darius said calmly. "And I believe you have a middle seat waiting for you near the toilets. Enjoy the view." Brock sputtered, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed past Darius, muttering curses. Darius sat down in 1A. The leather was soft. He stretched his legs out. A different flight attendant, a woman named Sarah who looked terrified, appeared instantly with a bottle of Dom Perignon. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, her hand shaking slightly as she poured. "Can I get you anything else?" Darius took the glass. He took a sip. "Yes, Sarah," he said. "I need the Wi-Fi to stay on. I'm not done yet." Because Darius Kincaid knew that getting his seat back was just the beginning, Preston thought the debt call was off the table because he had apologized. But Darius Kincaid didn't make threats he didn't intend to keep. He opened his laptop. He looked at the fuel credit authorization for London Heathrow. He hovered his mouse over the suspend button. The airline had humiliated him. They had treated him like garbage until they realized he had money. That wasn't a mistake. That was a system. And you don't fix a system by changing a seat. You fix it by burning it down. The cabin of Flight 8082 was quiet, but it was the silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. In seat 1A, Darius Kincaid sat with his laptop open. The flight attendant, Sarah, kept refilling his water glass without being asked, her movements jittery. She knew something was wrong. The whole crew knew. Darius wasn't watching a movie. He was watching a real-time logistics map of the world. He saw Meridian Atlantic's fleet, little blue plane icons scattered across the globe. One was preparing to take off from Tokyo. Another was taxiing in Dubai. A third was at the gate in Los Angeles. Darius typed a message to his CFO in Chicago: "Execute Phase 2. Freeze the accounts. Mark all Meridian fuel credit as high-risk delinquent." He hit enter. It was a nuclear option. In the world of aviation, fuel is liquid gold, but credit is the pipeline. Airlines don't pay cash for fuel at the pump. They rely on massive rolling lines of credit. When that line is cut, the fuel trucks stop moving. It's immediate. Darius watched the screen. 10 minutes passed. Then the chaos began. Not on the plane, but on the ground. His screen began to light up with notifications from his internal system. Alert. Fuel request denied. Flight MA404, Tokyo. Alert. Fuel request denied. Flight MA112, Dubai. Alert. Fuel request denied. Flight MA9992, Los Angeles. It was cascading. The vascular system of the airline had just been clamped shut. Back in 34E, Timothy Brock was not going quietly. The alcohol he had consumed in the lounge, combined with the humiliation of being marched to the back of the plane, had turned him belligerent. "I am going to sue every single one of you," Brock shouted, kicking the seat in front of him. The young mother in 34D was clutching her baby, terrified. "Sir, you need to settle down," Greg, the flight attendant, hissed. "You are disturbing the cabin." "Disturbing? I'm the victim here," Brock yelled. "That guy up front? Who is he? Some rapper? Some drug dealer? You kicked me out for him?" Darius heard the commotion from the front. The acoustic curtains of first class dampened the sound, but Brock's voice was piercing. Darius stood up. He walked to the galley where the purser was on the phone with the cockpit. "Captain says if he doesn't calm down, we have to divert to frantic," the purser whispered. "Don't divert," Darius said, stepping into the galley. The crew jumped. "He wants you to divert. It gives him power. Let me handle it." "Mr. Kincaid, we can't let you back there," Sarah said. "It's a security risk." "I'm already the security risk, Sarah," Darius said calmly. He walked down the aisle again. The passengers watched him. They knew he was the center of the storm. When he reached row 34, Brock looked up, his face red and sweaty. "You," Brock spat. "You think you're special?" Darius leaned down, resting his hand on the headrest of 34D, smiling gently at the scared mother to reassure her. Then he looked at Brock. "I know who you work for, Timothy," Darius said softly. Brock froze. "What?" "I ran your name while I was sitting in this seat earlier," Darius said. "You're a VP of sales for Orion Tech, right? Mid-level hardware supplier." "So what?" Brock sneered. "Orion Tech relies on rare earth metals shipped from Malaysia," Darius continued. "Guess who owns the shipping containers your company uses? Kincaid Global." Brock's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Now," Darius said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like grinding stones. "You are going to sit there. You are not going to say another word. You are not going to kick the seat. Because if you do, I will make a phone call, and your company's supply chain will vanish. You will be fired before we land. Do you understand?" Brock looked at Darius's eyes. He saw no bluff. He saw only the cold, hard reality of a man who moved mountains for a living. Brock slumped back into his seat. He folded his hands in his lap. He looked at the floor. "Good," Darius said. "Enjoy the flight." He walked back to first class. But as he sat down, the plane banked sharply. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into London. Heathrow a bit early. We, have been asked to prioritize our landing by air traffic control." That was a lie. ATC hadn't asked them to prioritize. The airline's operations center had ordered them to get on the ground immediately, because the company was collapsing in real time. Darius looked out the window. The sun was rising over the clouds. It was a beautiful morning for a bankruptcy. When the landing gear of Flight 882 locked into place, the cabin did not feel like a vessel arriving at a destination. It felt like a balloon losing its air. The descent into London Heathrow had been aggressive, the kind of approach pilots make when the fuel gauges are tapping the red zone and the ground controllers are shouting orders. Darius Kincaid looked out the window of seat 1A. The sky over London was a bruised purple, the sun just beginning to bleed through the heavy cloud cover. When the wheels finally kissed the tarmac, there was no triumphant roar of reverse thrusters. The plane braked hard, shuddering as it slowed, and then, inexplicably, it turned away from the terminal. They didn't taxi to the sleek glass gates of Terminal 3. They rolled past the rows of British Airways jets, past the cargo depots, out to the far, desolate reaches of the airfield, known as the remote stands. The engines spooled down, whining into silence. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Bennett's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding hollow and defeated. "We have been denied a gate assignment due to administrative issues with the airport authority. We are waiting for stairs to be brought to the aircraft. Please remain seated." Darius knew exactly what those administrative issues were. A plane without credit is a liability. Heathrow Airport wasn't going to let a Meridian Atlantic jet dock at a gate if they weren't sure the airline could pay the docking fee. Darius opened his phone. The screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications. CNN. Breaking. Meridian Atlantic Airlines suspends all global operations following massive credit default. BBC. Thousands stranded as Meridian planes denied fuel at major hubs in Tokyo, Dubai, and Los Angeles. Bloomberg. Meridian Atlantic, MAA. Stock plunges 60% in pre-market trading. Trading halted by SEC. He had missed 15 calls from Preston Halloway. The voicemails were getting progressively more desperate, transforming from professional concern to unbridled panic. Through the window, Darius saw a set of mobile stairs approaching the aircraft, followed by a transport bus and 2 police cruisers with their blue lights flashing silently against the grey morning. The first-class cabin door opened. The cool, damp air of London rushed in, cutting through the stale, recycled atmosphere of the cabin. 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police boarded the plane, their high-visibility jackets bright against the muted luxury of the cabin. Back in row 34, Timothy Brock saw the flashing lights through the window. A smug, intoxicated grin spread across his face. He stood up, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and shoved past the flight attendant, Greg. "Finally!" Brock shouted, his voice slurring slightly from the wine he'd been nervously chugging. "About time you got here. I want to file a report." He marched up the aisle, pointing an accusatory finger at the back of Darius's head. "That's him! The guy in 1A! He threatened me! He said he'd ruin my career! I want him arrested for terroristic threats!" The officers didn't even look at Brock. They walked straight past him, brushing his pointing hand aside, as if it were a tree branch blocking a path. They stopped at seat 1A. "Mr. Kincaid?" the older officer asked, his tone respectful, almost deferential. "That's me," Darius said. He closed his laptop, unplugged his phone, and stood up. He adjusted his hoodie, pulling the hem down. "Sir, we've been asked by the airport authority to escort you off the aircraft immediately. There is a delegation waiting for you in the Windsor suite." "Am I under arrest?" Darius asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir. Quite the opposite," the officer replied. "Given the volatile nature of the situation with the airline, the authorities want to ensure you clear customs without incident. They seem very concerned about your experience today." Timothy Brock stood frozen in the aisle, his mouth agape. The narrative in his head, the one where the wealthy executive is protected and the man in the hoodie is punished, had just shattered. "Wait. What?" Brock stammered. "He's the problem. I'm a platinum member." "Sir, take your seat or you will be arrested for interfering with a police operation," the officer barked over his shoulder, not bothering to turn around. Darius grabbed his leather weekender bag. He stepped into the aisle and looked at Brock one last time. He didn't say a word. He just offered a small, pitying nod, the way one might look at a child who has dropped their ice cream cone. Darius walked to the front of the plane. Captain Bennett was standing by the open cockpit door, his cap in his hands. He looked aged, his eyes rimmed with red. He knew that without a fuel line, this Boeing 777 was essentially a 300-ton paperweight. He was stranded in London, and his career was likely over. "Mr. Kincaid," Bennett said, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't meet Darius's eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have fixed it at the gate. I should have listened." Darius paused. The anger he felt toward the system didn't extend to the man standing in front of him. Bennett was a cog in a broken machine, just doing what the manual told him to do. "You did your job, Bennett. You followed protocol," Darius said quietly. "The protocol was the problem. Don't worry about your pension. You're a good pilot. Keep your phone on." Darius descended the stairs to the tarmac. The wind whipped at his clothes. He was ushered into a black Mercedes waiting by the bus. As the car pulled away, he saw the faces of the other passengers pressed against the windows of the plane, watching him leave. Inside Terminal 3, the scene was apocalyptic. The Meridian Atlantic check-in counters were besieged by hundreds of angry passengers. Security guards were struggling to hold back the crowd. The flight boards were a sea of red text. "Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled." Darius was whisked past the chaos, through a private corridor that bypassed the screaming crowds, and into the hushed sanctuary of the Windsor suite. The conference room was silent, smelling of polished wood and fresh lilies. Waiting for him was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, even though the crisis had only started 5 hours ago. It was Arthur Pendergast, the chairman of the board for Meridian Atlantic. He was a man who usually projected an aura of untouchable wealth, but today his tie was loosened, and his face was the color of ash. "Mr. Kincaid," Pendergast said, standing up. He extended a hand, but seeing Darius's stony expression, he let it drop awkwardly to his side. "Thank you for meeting me." Darius didn't sit. He threw his bag onto a leather armchair and walked to the window, looking out at the grounded planes. "You've killed us, Darius," Pendergast said, his voice shaking. "The credit freeze. We can't move. The fleet is grounded. We are bleeding $10 million an hour. The creditors are calling in loans we can't pay." "I didn't kill you, Arthur," Darius said, turning slowly to face him. "I just turned off the life support you were borrowing from me. There's a difference." "What do you want?" Pendergast pleaded, spreading his hands on the mahogany table. "We fired the gate agent, Brenda Miller. We fired the station manager at JFK. Holloway is drafting a resignation letter right now. We will issue a public apology. We will give you lifetime first-class travel. Just turn the fuel back on." Darius laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Lifetime travel? Arthur, I own the fuel company. I don't need your charity, and it's too late for apologies. The market has already reacted. Your stock is trading at junk status. If I turn the fuel back on now, you'll still be bankrupt by Friday." Pendergast sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "So this is it? You destroyed a 70-year-old airline because of a seat assignment?" "No," Darius said, walking over to the table and leaning in, his palms pressing against the wood. "I destroyed it because When I walked up to that counter, your employee didn't see a customer. She saw a stereotype. And your system backed her up. And your passengers backed her up. You built a company culture on arrogance. I'm just charging you the tax for it." The room went silent. Pendergast looked up, his eyes dead. "Then we liquidate. 40,000 people lose their jobs. Is that the justice you wanted?" "I am a businessman, Arthur. I don't like waste," Darius said, his voice shifting from accusatory to calculating. "You have good planes. You have good pilots. You have valuable slots at Heathrow and JFK." Pendergast looked at him, confusion clouding his despair. "What are you saying?" "I'm not going to turn the credit back on," Darius said. "I'm going to buy the debt, all of it. The fuel debt, the engine leases, the airport fees. I'm buying it all for pennies on the dollar. And then, Darius said, checking his watch, "I'm going to convert that debt into equity." Pendergast's eyes widened as the realization hit him. "You want to take over?" "Hostile takeover," Darius corrected. "Very hostile. By the time the markets close in New York today, Kincaid Global will own 51% of Meridian Atlantic. I will own the planes, the routes, the brand, and the debt." "The board will never approve it," Pendergast stammered. "It's madness." "The board has no choice," Darius said coldly. "You can approve it and walk away with a golden parachute and your dignity intact. Or you can explain to the 40,000 passengers currently sleeping on airport floors why you refused the only lifeline you had." Darius pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. "I have the press release drafted. It announces the acquisition and the immediate resumption of fuel services. Do you want to sign it? Or should I let the reporters outside know that Arthur Pendergast decided to let the airline die?" Pendergast stared at the folder. He looked at Darius, the man in the hoodie who had just outmaneuvered $1 billion board of directors from an economy seat. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a gold pen, and with a trembling hand opened the folder. The acquisition of Meridian Atlantic didn't happen with the slow, bureaucratic churn typical of corporate mergers. It happened with the violence and velocity of a lightning strike. Within 48 hours of the fuel freeze, the paperwork was finalized. The airline, a 70-year-old institution of the skies, ceased to be an independent entity. It was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Kincaid Global. Darius Kincaid didn't fly home to Chicago to celebrate. He didn't pop champagne. Instead, he set up a war room in the airline's London headquarters, sleeping on a leather sofa in the executive suite for 3 hours a night. He wasn't there to dismantle the company for parts. He was there to perform open-heart surgery. His first official act as owner was a mandatory town hall meeting. He didn't want it in a sterile conference room. He ordered it to be held in Maintenance Hangar 4 at Heathrow, a cavernous, echoey space that smelled of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. By 9 a.m. on Wednesday, 3,000 employees were packed into the hangar. The mood was funereal. Mechanics in grease-stained coveralls stood shoulder to shoulder with flight attendants in pristine uniforms and pilots clutching their caps. The air was thick with anxiety. They had all seen the news. They knew the stock had crashed. They assumed this meeting was the end of the line. The moment the hatchet man came out to announce mass layoffs, a hush fell over the crowd as a figure walked onto the makeshift stage. There was no introduction. There was no fanfare. Darius Kincaid walked up to the microphone stand. He wasn't wearing a tailored Italian suit. He wasn't wearing a tie. He was wearing the same charcoal hoodie he had worn on Flight 8822. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the sea of faces. He let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "Some of you are scared," Darius said, his voice amplified through the massive speakers, bouncing off the aluminum skin of the Boeing 737 parked behind him. He didn't use notes. He didn't use a teleprompter. "You think I bought this airline to dismantle it," he continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "You think I'm angry. You think I'm here to punish you for the sins of your leadership." He stopped and looked directly into the front row. "I am angry," Darius admitted, his voice dropping an octave. "I was treated like a criminal for trying to sit in a seat I paid for. I was judged, dismissed, and threatened. But I didn't buy this company to fire you. I bought it to fix you." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Darius pointed to the massive LED screen behind him. It flickered to life, displaying a high-resolution photo of Brenda, the gate agent from JFK. A collective gasp went through the room. "This employee is gone," Darius said, his tone devoid of malice but heavy with finality. "Not because she made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. She is gone because she lacked curiosity. She looked at the world, saw a man in a hoodie, and decided she knew everything about him in 3 seconds. That is a cancer, and we are cutting it out." The image on the screen changed. Now, it showed a photo of Captain Bennett. In the middle of the crowd, Captain Bennett froze. He was standing with his co-pilots, pale and sweating. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the public humiliation. He was the captain of the flight. Surely the buck stopped with him. "This man," Darius said, turning to look at the photo. "Captain Bennett." Darius scanned the crowd until he found the real Bennett. "Captain, step forward, please." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Bennett walked toward the stage, his legs feeling like lead. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. "When the mistake was identified," Darius said, his voice rising with passion, "this man didn't hide behind a union rep. He didn't hide behind protocol. He came back to row 34. He looked me in the eye. He apologized, and he tried to make it right, even when he was terrified." Darius extended a hand down from the stage. Bennett, trembling slightly, took it. "That is the culture we are building," Darius announced. "As of this morning, Captain Bennett is promoted to Chief Pilot of Fleet Operations." For a second, there was silence. Then, a single mechanic started clapping. Then, a flight attendant. Within 10 seconds, the hangar erupted. It wasn't polite corporate applause. It was a roar of relief and vindication. They weren't being purged. They were being led. Darius raised a hand to quiet them. "One more thing," he said. "The name Meridian Atlantic is tainted. It represents a legacy of arrogance. We are burying it today." The screen behind him flashed white, then dissolved into a new logo. It was sleek, modern, in deep midnight blue and silver. Kincaid Air. "We are going to be the first airline where the economy experience is treated with the same dignity as first class," Darius promised, "because you never know who is sitting in row 34. From now on, we don't serve customers. We serve people." As the cheers resumed, louder this time, Darius stepped back. He didn't smile. There was too much work to do. But he knew he had done the hardest part. He had turned a mob of scared employees into an army. However, the karma that Darius had unleashed had not finished its work. Across the ocean, in a luxury apartment in Manhattan, the story was ending very differently for Timothy Brock. Brock sat alone in his living room, surrounded by packing boxes. The silence in his apartment was deafening. Darius hadn't been bluffing. He hadn't needed to sue Brock. He simply let the truth do the work. A passenger in row 33 had filmed the entire incident. Brock screaming, kicking the seat, shouting, "Do you know who I am?" The video had 40 million views. Orion Tech, Brock's employer, hadn't just fired him. They had issued a public statement distancing themselves from his abhorrent behavior. He was radioactive. Headhunters hung up on him. His LinkedIn inbox, once full of recruiters, was now full of hate mail. Brock stared at his phone, watching the live stream of Darius Kincaid in the London hangar. He watched the employees cheering. He watched the birth of Kincaid Air. He smashed his hand against the coffee table, a scream of frustration trapped in his throat. He had lost his job, his reputation, and his future, all because he couldn't just keep his mouth shut and let a man in a hoodie board a plane. He was the architect of his own destruction. And as he watched Darius Kincaid walk off the stage, Timothy Brock realized he would never fly first class again. 6 months had passed since the day the engines stopped, and JFK International Airport felt like a different world. At least Terminal 4 did. The oppressive, headache-inducing hum of fluorescent lights had been replaced by softer, warmer LED fixtures. The air didn't smell like stress and stale coffee anymore. It smelled clean. But the biggest change wasn't the architecture. It was the energy. Darius Kincaid walked through the sliding glass doors, merging into the flow of travelers. He wasn't flanked by bodyguards. He wasn't wearing a three-piece suit to announce his status. He was dressed in a fresh charcoal t-shirt, dark denim, and the same brand of understated sneakers he had worn on that fateful night. He looked like a man who valued comfort over volume. To the passing crowds, he was nobody special, and that was exactly how he liked it. He approached gate B22. It was the same gate where Brenda had once sneered at him. But the tension that used to hang over the podium was gone. The Kincaid Air staff behind the counter weren't frantically typing or snapping gum. They were actually talking to passengers. Darius stepped up to the counter. The agent was a young man named David, his uniform pressed, his name tag straight. He looked up with a genuine smile, not the customer service mask that vanished the moment you turned your back, but a real expression of welcome. "Checking in for London?" David asked brightly, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Yes," Darius said, placing his passport on the cool granite. "1 bag." David scanned the document. For a split second, his eyes widened as the name populated on his screen. Darius Kincaid, owner. Darius watched him closely. In the old Meridian Atlantic days, this was the moment the panic would set in, the fawning, the nervous sweating, the desperate attempt to cover up incompetence. But David just took a breath, composed himself, and looked Darius in the eye with professional respect. "Mr. Kincaid," David said, his voice steady. "Welcome back. I see you're in seat 1A today." "I am," Darius replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Excellent. The lounge is open, and we'll be boarding in 20 minutes. Is there anything else I can do for you?" "No, David, that's perfect." Darius took his boarding pass. It felt heavy with symbolism, a small piece of paper that represented a massive victory. He turned to walk toward security, but a commotion near the economy queue caught his ear. A woman was standing near the lane dividers, looking utterly defeated. She had a crying infant strapped to her chest, a toddler clinging to her leg, and was struggling to manage 2 heavy carry-on bags that kept tipping over. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from navigating a world designed to make things difficult for you. She was staring at the long, winding snake of the economy line with a look of despair. Darius stopped. He thought back to row 34, to the mother he had sat next to on flight 8A2. He remembered how the old system had treated people like cattle. He turned back to the counter. "David," Darius said softly. The agent looked up immediately. "Sir?" Darius gestured toward the woman. "You see that passenger? The mother with the 2 children?" David followed his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Upgrade her," Darius said. "Business class. Block the seat next to her so she has room for the kids. Put it on my personal tab." The woman, who had just dropped one of her bags again, looked up as David approached her. Darius watched from a distance. He saw her confusion turn to shock, and then to a relief so profound she looked like she might cry. I can't pay for that," he heard her stammer. "It's taken care of," Darius murmured to himself, though David was already delivering the message. "Kincaid Air Policy. We look out for our passengers." Satisfied, Darius walked down the jet bridge. He stepped onto the plane, greeted by a flight crew that radiated pride rather than fear. He turned left and found Seat 1A. He sat down. The leather was cool and soft. He stretched his legs out, the physical space, a luxury he no longer took for granted. Through the window, he saw the massive turbine of the engine. It was painted with the new Kincaid Air logo, a stylized wing rising upward. He thought about Brenda. He thought about Preston Halloway and Timothy Brock. He thought about the day the world stopped because a man in a hoodie decided he'd had enough. They had tried to build walls to keep him out, and in doing so, they had forced him to buy the building. The cabin chimes dinged soft and melodic. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and assured. Darius closed his eyes. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the sound of a system that finally worked. For the first time in 6 months, Darius Kincaid didn't need to be vigilant. He didn't need to fight. He simply leaned his head back, exhaled, and slept. So, what's the lesson here? It's not just, don't judge a book by its cover. It's that in the modern world, power isn't always wearing a suit and tie. Sometimes, power is silent. Sometimes, it's sitting in seat 34E, waiting for you to make a mistake. Meridian Atlantic learned the hard way that dignity isn't a luxury item you can ration out to the people you think deserve it. Darius Kincaid didn't just buy an airline. He bought a lesson for the entire industry. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about karma hitting back hard, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one. Stay humble, guys.